Hello, I'm Hope Logan. I am an actor on Bold and the Beautiful, and many people really love both me and our Bold and the Beautiful drama. So I've come here to share updates about my beloved Bold and the Beautiful. Everyone, please subscribe and support me. If you do, I will keep coming every day with new updates for you. The battle for power inside the Bold and the Beautiful was no longer simmering quietly beneath the surface. What had once been whispered conversations and subtle manipulations was now erupting into a full-scale emotional war, and at the center of it all stood Steffy Forrester, refusing to surrender everything she had built. The moment Ridge hesitated, unable to even properly ask his daughter to step aside, Steffy already knew exactly what was happening. She could see it written all over his face before he even found the courage to speak the words. Behind Brooke's sudden hunger for power, behind the co-CEO fantasy that seemed to appear out of nowhere, Steffi sensed another hand pulling the strings, and deep down, she already knew that hand belonged to Hope Logan. What made the betrayal sting even more was how obvious it suddenly became that this entire situation had been carefully orchestrated, a quiet campaign fueled by resentment, ambition, and manipulation. Steffi stood her ground with icy determination, refusing to allow Ridge to simply hand her position over to Brooke Logan as though everything she had accomplished meant nothing. The tension inside those Forrester offices felt suffocating as Ridge stumbled through weak justifications, trying to explain Brooke's desires while clearly lacking the conviction to truly fight for them. Steffi wasn't fooled for even a second by the fantasy Brooke kept pushing about her and Ridge being the next Stephanie and Eric, some grand legendary partnership reborn for a new generation. To Steffi, it sounded less like destiny and more like manipulation wrapped in nostalgia. Meanwhile, Brooke carried herself with complete confidence, believing Ridge would eventually bend to her will the way he always seemed to. After all, she had already thanked Hope for encouraging her to finally fight for what she believed she deserved, and in Brooke's mind, that fight was already halfway won. But Steffi refused to quietly fade into the background while her father chose Brooke yet again. For once in her life, she demanded that Ridge choose his daughter over the woman who had constantly pulled him back into emotional chaos. The confrontation carried years of unresolved pain beneath every word, making the entire situation feel less like a business dispute and more like a family fracture finally breaking wide open. Now Ridge faced the humiliating task of returning to Brooke empty-handed, carrying nothing but a designer dress as a consolation prize after failing to secure the promotion she had practically convinced herself was guaranteed. The emotional contrast between Brooke's confidence and Ridge's weakness created an almost painful atmosphere. Brooke had gone all in, seducing Ridge, reigniting passion, making him feel desired and adored, all to push him toward supporting her rise to power. She truly believed she had rocked his world enough to guarantee victory. But when the moment of truth came, Ridge barely even fought Steffi at all. It was obvious he never truly wanted to confront his daughter in the first place, yet Brooke's influence dragged him there anyway. And while Ridge stumbled through the mess, Steffi shocked everyone by offering something Brooke never expected: a compromise. Rather than stripping Brooke away completely, Steffi proposed a larger public-facing role where Brooke could become the glamorous face of Forrester Creations, traveling the world, representing the brand, standing in the spotlight, while Steffi remained behind the scenes handling the real business decisions that kept the company profitable and stable. But even as the offer left Steffi's lips, it already felt doomed. Brooke didn't want symbolism or appearances. She wanted power. The storm building between these women now felt inevitable, as though every hallway at Forrester Creations was quietly counting down to the moment everything exploded. Brooke would almost certainly confront Steffi directly, demanding she step aside, and there was every possibility she would seek out Eric Forrester to help force the issue. Yet beneath the surface of Brooke's ambition was the real source of this war, Hope's fury over hope for the future being pushed aside. That frustration had slowly transformed into something far more dangerous. What began as disappointment over a fashion line had evolved into a calculated campaign to dismantle Steffi's authority piece by piece. And once Steffi finally uncovered the full truth, once she realized Hope wasn't simply supporting Brooke, but had actually planted the entire idea from the very beginning, the fallout threatened to become catastrophic. Brooke had not originally dreamed up this co-CEO takeover on her own. Hope had pushed her toward it, encouraged her, convinced her she deserved more, until Brooke fully embraced the vision as though it had always been her own. That revelation alone could ignite an explosive confrontation between Steffi and Hope, unlike anything viewers had seen before. Steffi already suspected the power play revolved around Hope's desperation to revive her line, but hearing the details directly would push her rage to a breaking point. One could easily imagine Hope finally snapping under pressure and openly admitting everything. The resentment had been building inside her for far too long. Hope would likely unleash years of frustration, accusing the Forresters of constantly attacking the Logans, dismissing their contributions, and treating them like outsiders despite everything they had done for the company. In that heated emotional moment, Hope might proudly confess that yes, she encouraged Brooke to take Steffi's job because Brooke deserved that position more. She might even scream that she would not stop until Brooke stood beside Ridge as an equal and Steffi lost the power to control everyone around her. And beneath all the anger, Hope's deepest desire would finally become crystal clear. She wanted both herself and her mother to finally receive what they believed the Forresters had denied them for years. But if Hope believed her manipulation would succeed without consequences, she may have underestimated just how far she had pushed Steffi. There was a very real possibility that this scheme would become the final straw. Steffi could easily remind Hope that patience might have changed everything, that hope for the future likely would have returned after Eric's couture collection launched successfully. Instead, Hope once again resorted to emotional games, pressure tactics, and behind-the-scenes manipulation. She fueled Brooke's ego, constantly feeding her fantasies about being a queen beside Ridge and insisting they were fashion's greatest love story reborn. To Steffi, it would feel like history repeating itself all over again, the Logans trying to tear apart Forrester creations from within. Whether viewers sided with Steffi or not, even her harshest critics would struggle to deny how manipulative Hope's actions had become. And in a moment fueled by fury and betrayal, Steffi might finally decide she was done tolerating it. She could fire Hope all over again, cutting her loose from the company in one devastating move. What makes the situation even more dangerous is that Ridge himself might not stop it once he learns Hope orchestrated the entire disaster. If Steffi revealed the truth, Ridge could very well decide Hope crossed a line too severe to defend. And if Hope lost her job, there would still be one place waiting for her with open arms, the Logan side of the family, where Liam Spencer, Bill Spencer, and Katie Logan would undoubtedly rally around her. Yet another possible future loomed over the company as well, one where Brooke actually succeeded. If Eric chose to support Brooke's ambitions, Ridge would suddenly find himself trapped with no real way out. Brooke was never going to accept rejection gracefully, and Hope would almost certainly continue pushing her mother to fight harder, refusing to let Steffi get away with this. With Eric and Ridge combining their shares, they would possess enough power to remove Steffi from her co-CEO seat entirely and install Brooke beside Ridge exactly as Hope envisioned. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on longtime fans either. Across Soap's social media, viewers joked that the newest drinking game for the show was taking a shot every time someone said co-CEO. By the end of an episode, everyone would supposedly be completely wasted. But beneath the humor sat very real emotional stakes. Even if Brooke managed to force her way into Steffi's position, it still might not give Hope what she truly wanted. Ridge, Eric, and even Carter Walton would likely still agree that hope for the future needed to remain shelved until Eric's couture collection had its moment. Brooke's newfound power might not be enough to override that decision, leaving Hope furious that all her scheming still failed to restore her line immediately. That disappointment alone could drive Hope to storm out of the company altogether, consumed by frustration after realizing her plan had not produced the victory she imagined. And then there remained the wildest possibility of all, the scenario where Ridge simply stepped aside himself. Instead of choosing between Brooke and Steffy, he could abandon the co-CEO battlefield entirely and retreat back into the world he truly loved, designing. In that version of events, Brooke and Steffy would be forced to share power while Ridge escaped the endless emotional crossfire, quietly creating dresses while the two women battled for dominance. Ironically, that might actually be the least stressful solution for him personally. Yet even in that arrangement, Hope's dreams would still face disappointment because hope for the future would remain delayed until Eric's collection finished its run. And once again, Steffi would still possess the shares necessary to fire Hope if she chose to. Brooke might gain a title, but without ownership, her authority would always have limits. Ridge giving Brooke his shares seemed almost unimaginable, and even if he somehow did, Steffi would still hold greater control overall. As the dust continued to swirl around Forrester Creations, one truth became impossible to ignore. This battle was no longer simply about a corporate title. It was about loyalty, legacy, resentment, and years of emotional scars finally boiling over. Steffi was determined to protect the empire she helped build. Brooke was desperate to claim the recognition she believed she deserved, and Hope had transformed her frustration into a dangerous game of manipulation that threatened to destroy everything around her. No matter which path the story ultimately followed, it increasingly felt as though Hope's future at Forrester Creations was hanging by a thread. Whether Steffi fired her in anger or Hope eventually walked away in disappointment after her grand scheme failed, the writing on the wall seemed impossible to miss. The company stood on the edge of a civil war, and by the time the final decision was made, none of these relationships would ever be the same again. The emotional pressure surrounding the bold and the beautiful only continued to intensify as the walls began closing in around everyone involved. And nowhere was that tension more visible than inside Brooke Logan's growing desperation. After spending so much time convincing herself that Ridge would ultimately choose her, the possibility of rejection threatened to unravel every ounce of confidence she had carefully built. Brooke had already allowed herself to imagine the future, standing beside Ridge as co-CEO, reclaiming her place at the center of the company, proving once and for all that the Logans belonged at the top of the Forrester empire. Hope's constant encouragement only fueled that belief further, whispering into her mother's ear that she deserved more, that Steffi had held power for too long, and that the time had finally come to take back what should have been theirs all along. But the moment Ridge returned without the answer Brooke expected, the fantasy would begin to crack apart in painful slow motion. The dress he brought home, meant to soften the blow, would likely feel less like a gift and more like an insult. A beautiful distraction offered in place of the power and respect she truly wanted. Brooke's heartbreak in that moment would not simply come from disappointment. It would come from humiliation. She had opened herself emotionally and physically to Ridge, believing their connection was strong enough to influence him, believing the love they shared would finally outweigh his loyalty to Steffi. Instead, Ridge came back looking defeated, carrying excuses instead of solutions, and Brooke would immediately sense the weakness in him. The realization that he barely even fought for her would sting deeper than she expected. It would force Brooke to confront a painful truth she had spent years avoiding. No matter how much Ridge loved her, his inability to fully stand against Steffi continued to shape every major decision in his life. And that realization could push Brooke into a far more dangerous emotional space. Hurt pride mixed with wounded love had always been one of the most explosive combinations in Brooke Logan's world, and with Hope constantly fueling her anger, Brooke might finally stop waiting for Ridge to fix things and decide to take matters into her own hands. At the same time, Steffy's frustration would continue growing with every passing hour as the pieces of Hope's manipulation slowly fell into place. The more Steffy replayed the situation in her mind, the clearer the truth became. Brooke's sudden obsession with becoming co-CEO simply didn't feel organic. It felt planted, encouraged, carefully nurtured until it grew into a full-blown power grab. And the only person with enough motivation to light that fire was Hope Logan. Every clue pointed back to her. Every emotional argument Brooke repeated sounded suspiciously similar to Hope's own long-standing frustrations about hope for the future, about Logan women being disrespected, about Steffy controlling too much power inside the company. Once Steffy fully connected those dots, her anger would no longer remain controlled or strategic. It would become deeply personal. To Steffy, this would no longer feel like a disagreement over business decisions. It would feel like an attack on her family, her authority, and the company she had fought endlessly to protect. And Hope, fueled by resentment and years of feeling overshadowed, might not back down quietly when the confrontation finally comes. In fact, the more Steffy pushed her, the more emotional Hope could become. All the bitterness she had buried beneath polite smiles and carefully measured words might suddenly erupt at once. She could accuse Steffy of treating the Logans like second-class citizens inside a company they helped build. She could argue that Brooke spent years sacrificing herself for Forrester Creations, while Steffy constantly acted like the company belonged exclusively to her bloodline. And in that emotionally charged moment, Hope might openly admit that, yes, she encouraged Brooke to pursue the co-CEO role because somebody finally needed to stand up to Steffy's control. The confrontation would carry years of unresolved rivalry underneath every sentence, turning a corporate conflict into something far more emotional and destructive. But what Hope may fail to realize is that every word she says could push Steffy closer to making a devastating decision. Steffy had already tolerated conflict surrounding Hope for the future, already dealt with endless disagreements over creative direction and business priorities. Yet this situation crossed into dangerous territory because it involved direct manipulation aimed at undermining leadership itself. From Steffy's perspective, Hope was no longer simply frustrated about a paused fashion line. She was actively trying to destabilize the company from within. And once Steffy reached that conclusion, firing Hope might begin to feel less like revenge and more like necessary damage control. The emotional weight of that decision would still be enormous, especially given the complicated history between the two women, but Steffy's patience appeared to be running out faster than ever before. Meanwhile, Ridge would find himself trapped in the center of another emotional battlefield he seemed completely incapable of controlling. Every direction he turned led to another impossible choice. If he supported Brooke, he risked devastating Steffy and creating permanent fractures within his family. But if he continued standing beside Steffy, Brooke would once again feel abandoned after believing he would finally put her first. The tragedy of Ridge's position was that no matter what he chose, someone he loved would end up deeply hurt. And perhaps worst of all, his own indecisiveness continued, making everything worse. Rather than taking a firm stand early, Ridge allowed emotions, manipulation, and false hope to spiral into chaos until the entire company became consumed by conflict. Now, the emotional fallout threatened to explode far beyond a simple boardroom disagreement. Even Eric Forrester could soon find himself pulled into the center of the storm whether he wanted to be or not. Brooke might approach him directly, appealing to their history, reminding him of everything she contributed to the company and the family over the years. Hope would almost certainly encourage that strategy, believing Eric represented the one person capable of tipping the balance of power against Steffy. And if Eric showed even the slightest sympathy toward Brooke's argument, the entire situation could shift overnight. Suddenly, Steffy's position would no longer feel secure, and the possibility of Brooke becoming co-CEO would transform from fantasy into a terrifyingly real outcome. The tension inside Forrester Creations would become unbearable as everyone waited to see where Eric's loyalty ultimately landed. Yet even if Brooke succeeded in gaining power, the victory might not bring the happiness Hope imagined. That possibility hung over the story like a dark cloud waiting to burst. Hope seemed convinced that Brooke becoming co-CEO would automatically restore hope for the future to its former glory, but business realities might still crush those expectations. Eric's couture line remained the company's top priority, and both Ridge and Carter would likely continue supporting that strategy regardless of who held the executive title. If Hope realized that Brooke's rise still changed nothing for her own fashion line, the disappointment could become explosive. After everything she manipulated, after all the emotional damage caused by this scheme, Hope could end up exactly where she started, frustrated, powerless, and furious. That emotional collapse might ultimately become the thing that drives Hope away from Forrester Creations entirely. Whether Steffy officially fires her or Hope storms out on her own terms, the company increasingly feels too small to contain all this resentment any longer. The relationships inside those walls have become poisoned by years of rivalry, jealousy, and emotional wounds that never fully healed. Every interaction now carries hidden agendas and buried pain. And as this corporate war continues spiraling out of control, it feels less and less likely that everyone involved can survive it intact. The battle for power may have started with a business title, but it has evolved into something much darker, a fight over identity, legacy, love, and belonging. By the time the dust finally settles, somebody will almost certainly lose far more than just a job.